Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to see you here. I'm Tod Machover, and this is the Kronos Quartet, as you know. And this is a bit of an unusual event because we've organized it around one composition, a new piece that the Kronos asked me to write for a commissioning series that they're working on called 50 for the Future, which we'll talk about in a minute. Do you want to say anything about 50 for the Future before we get going? This is David Harrington, who founded the quartet.
50 for the Future is a project that Kronos has been working on now for about 4 years. It'll probably take us 3 more to complete a 5-year project. I don't know how it is at MIT, but in Kronos land, it's kind of like that sometimes. The idea is that we hope to bring other groups, especially younger groups, but not only younger groups, any quartets that want to do the kind of work that we do. We're hoping to give them the tools to enable them to enter the kind of world of music that Kronos is a part of. And so the idea is that over 5 years, we commission 50 pieces, 25 women composers, 25 men composers, from as many corners of the musical universe as we can fit into 50 new pieces. And we publish the scores, the parts, and they're downloadable for free on our website. We also record the music, and it's anybody can listen to that music. And then also there are a lot of materials that are provided that allow players and listeners and other composers into this world that we're trying to create. So that's basically what we're trying to do. The scores and parts are available for free 24 hours a day, so you don't have to send off to a publisher and pay money and have all kinds of problems getting the material. It's absolutely available. And so far, we started counting and noting how often the music has been downloaded. And we started right at the 2016 election. I don't know what it is about that kind of propelled us to start detailing this, but we did. And so far, groups from 86 countries have downloaded the first 20 pieces. And I think it's around 14,000 times. So it's beginning to take off a little bit, and we asked Tod to make a piece, and we'll get into this as the afternoon proceeds.
Yeah, so what we'd like to do is play the piece. It's not a long piece. Actually, I should say, I don't know exactly how you asked all the different composers, how you defined the commission, but this commission, what David asked me to do was one of the hardest things I've ever been asked to do. I almost couldn't figure out how to do it. He basically said, write a piece that can be played by all kinds of string quartets, the best string quartets to beginning string quartets. Knowing the kind of work that I did, he said, write something that uses electronics and live performance in a really unusual way that could allow young musicians in particular to see what's possible with electronics. Then he said, I remember we were sitting at a cafe outside and I said, okay, I'll try that. And then he said, and if possible, could you, we know you're at MIT, we know you're at the Media Lab where you and everybody you work with think always about the future of music. So it'd be great if you could write a piece that would pose some questions that would maybe leave something about its basic idea open-ended, so that well into the future, young quartets might look at it and say, oh, that's something that this piece is dealing with, but we can make a new version of it or we can revise it. So that was another challenge. And then when we started rehearsing, typical, with a bunch of people who work with me, some of whom you'll meet today, we started making some tests and thinking about, okay, what are some new ways of measuring the string quartet and having the electronics respond? And we had a session with the Kronos. And then the last thing that they all said, which made sense, but I hadn't thought of, is, well, this is for young quartets, and maybe they don't have a huge electronic setup, maybe they don't have sensors, maybe they don't have computers to do all this. So could the technology be very, very simple? So I had to think of a piece that did all of those things and was also 10 minutes long. So it was really, really hard. But I kept thinking about it, and what I came up with is what you'll hear. And it's a piece called GAMMIFIED because it's based on research that started here at MIT and I think is kind of taking fire. We'll tell you more about it in detail. But it's based on the idea that there are a certain range of frequencies around 40 hertz that have been shown to have phenomenal effects, first in mice and now in humans, both in audio and also in light, for stimulating your brain. And actually, Alexandra Rieger, who works in our group, will tell you more about this in detail. And we're doing a lot of work to see musically how to use these frequencies and is it work best if you listen to them all day, if you listen to them for short periods, loud, soft, with what else around it. So I thought maybe this is a perfect opportunity to make a piece of music with these frequencies embedded that's kind of an experience to spend time with the frequencies and to see if I could make a musical experience which would lead your listening to the frequencies. That's certainly research which is going to keep going well into the future, so quartets will be able to adapt this. It's kind of an experiment, both musically and scientifically, so this is what we came up with. So what we're going to do is play the piece, then we'll talk about it. We'll talk a little bit about the gamma theory. We'll talk a little bit about how the piece is put together. We'll hear some of it in parts. We might even decide to rehearse a couple of sections, and then we'll play it again. So you'll get to hear the whole piece twice, hopefully with some description of how it's put together. So here's the Kronos Quartet playing GAMMIFIED. Thank you. So you want to talk about it a little bit?
Sure.
So what does it feel like to play that? It's a kind of a funny piece.
I enjoyed playing it very much. Yeah, I enjoyed playing it very, very much. It fits. It felt good. Yeah.
Yeah. We should introduce you all, by the way, since they know program notes. Do you want to introduce everybody? I could, but why don't you?
Okay, sure. We'll start with Sunny Yang on cello, Hank Dutt on viola, John Sherba violin, and I'm David Harrington, also on violin.
And I should say, what year you started in 1973? Is
1973,
that right?
yeah.
Incredible. So not only is the Kronos remarkable quartet because of their playing and because of their adventurous spirit for discovering music, but they've been a group together for all this time. And actually, David, John, and Hank are all original members of the Kronos, which is very unusual for a string quartet. It's quite something, yeah. So I asked you how it is to play, but it was unusual to write because I wanted to do something where these gamma, we'll play the gamma frequency on its own in a minute. It's obviously that kind of low sound. And it's funny, it's 40 hertz on its own is the low E on a piano, or the lowest note a double bass can play. And if you hear just a sine wave at that, you can hear it if you just hear a sine wave at 40 hertz, but it doesn't really have any impact. So the question is, what spectrum do you need above that frequency to make an impact? So over at actually both Ed Boyden from the Media Lab and Lee Wei Tsai from the Picower Institute and our group have been doing research on which spectra works best. And so it's kind of a slightly distorted sawtooth wave so it's something you can't actually play on an instrument. You can sort of go like this. That's kind of the closest, and instruments don't do that very well. But I wanted to write a piece where that was kind of always there. But and actually a lot of the research that's done with gamma has people sit in a room for an hour listening to, and people will, for $25, people will do that, I guess. But and the results are really good. But I didn't want to do that, so it had to be in there. And then the job of the quartet is to not just musicalize it, but to pull elements out of it and play it. So the whole structure of it's a little unusual. Do you hear that gamma all the time while you're playing?
Definitely, yeah, and trying to learn to relate to it. In fact, I was just noticing right at the end, the last note I play, I can't even hear myself, and yet I'm trying not to make an accent on this note because the is so loud, in the headphone. And so I just realized something about the way I'm going to play it next time.
Yeah. Like how? How would you play it differently?
I just need to hold the bow a little tighter and draw the bow faster right at the beginning of the note, and then I think I'll be able to hear it.
Yeah.
It's interesting, too, because in the middle, I actually turned up the gamma from where I originally had it, and I enjoyed having it very present in my headphone.
There is
the
something...
way you interact with it.
Yeah, there's
special.
I actually, when we found kind of that buzzy right spectrum. I enjoy listening to it. As you said it the other day, it's, there's this one pitch that's there the whole time. The harmony of the piece changes, but, it's kind of restrained. And so in some ways it's like a meditation, but you said the other day that it's not a meditation, it's like an activation. The idea is to kind of wake up your brain, which is what these frequencies do. So,
Well, and that was in response to the research you were telling us about with the mice, remember?
yeah, maybe we should invite Alexandra to come up. And
Yes.
So this is Alexandra Rieger, who's a PhD student in our Opera of the Future group at the Media Lab. Come on, give her. So Alexandra has a deep background in music, but also in neuroscience and multisensory perception. And she studied first at Stanford, and then went to Oxford, and then went to Dartmouth. And when she applied here, I was like, you don't need another degree, but we were so glad to get her here that now she's working here. And I thought it would be great if you tell people just a little bit about kind of what's known about gamma and what's promising and what isn't known yet.
Absolutely. So it's fascinating as we come to learn more about the brain and about our cognitive processes. We learn more about different brainwave states and cognitive states, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, so on. As we also learn more about aging brains in the Aging Brain Initiative and understanding individuals with Alzheimer's, we find that there's a certain brainwave state that isn't as present as others. And could we guess what that is? Gamma. And so that had us ask several different questions, one of which, why? And then, do we need gamma? There's a lot that we have previously associated gamma with, including higher cognitive ranges of thinking. Some people say intuition. But what we've also learned is that gamma is really in charge of many more neurobiological processes than we've formally understood. So, for example, gamma also helps with plaque regulation cycles. So in our brain, we often have plaques that all of us, and it's regulated by the gamma brainwave state. So in the mouse model studies, we found that when gamma is artificially induced in mice that have some form of Alzheimer's or a type of beta amyloid plaque accumulation, with the introduction of the gamma frequency signals, there was over 85% increase of co-localization of this microglial cellular activity.
I just wanted to jump in and tell the mouse story, because I actually can't remember why Ed Boyden and Lee Wei Tsai's group were experimenting with these frequencies at the beginning, whether it was an accident but if you go over to the Picower Institute, just around the block, they have a bunch of rooms with lots of mice in them, and they're pretty dark. They kind of look like drive-in movie setups for mice. So they have transparent boxes with lots of white mice in them. And so they started with a bunch of these mice, and they were trying different things, but one thing they were trying was flashing lights. And they found that when they flash white light at 40 hertz, so quite fast, and lots of little dots, so kind of looking like you were looking at a drive-in movie of a star constellations at night, sort of going like that. When they did that, all of a sudden these mice were like, I'm going to watch the movie. And then they thought, okay, that seems to work. Would it maybe work with older mice, mice who were just normal pathology but tired? So they tried it with older mice, and after about a half a day of exposure to these same lights, the older mice were, I'm going to watch that movie. They were watching. And then they tried it with mice bred with Alzheimer's disease. And that was the big surprise. So after a couple of days of exposure to these flashing lights, the Alzheimer's mice were alert and watching the light and able to find their way through a maze, which they absolutely couldn't before. And so then Ed and Lee Wei and their teams went back to look at at the research and figure out what was going on. And the first thing they found is that these frequencies were dilating the arteries in the brain where the plaque builds up for Alzheimer's, and the plaque disappears when you're exposed to these frequencies, which you can't get rid of the plaque any other way. Then they found out that it works in humans, and as Alexandra's been explaining, it turns out that these gamma waves around 40 hertz seem to regulate all kinds of things in the brain. So the trick is how to get brains that aren't producing the 40 hertz properly to produce them. And the answer is, you have to listen to this piece over and over and over again. So anyway,
Yes.
yeah. So what's the next frontier? And you know, obviously this is the beginning of something, but there's a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. I mean, we've had within a few treatments, there were over 50% of the beta amyloid plaque reduction in the mice. And so, of course, the next step was to say, could we replicate this in humans? People sometimes laugh when we say, you know, humans and mice are very different perceptual systems, but it's true. And so when we think about human cognition, one of the things we understand is that we're very multisensory. And so we've been working on a very multisensory front. Even in the EEG studies, when it's just the lights alone, you're affecting the visual cortex, these regions. However, when it's light and audio, suddenly you'd look at the bandwidth and they would pretty much double because you're also stimulating the frontotemporal regions of the brain. And that's sort of that information nexus. And so it's very exciting to think about some of the case studies we've been doing that have been successful, as well as some of the pilot studies and the EEG studies. We've also done in-home installations where we've created these kind of multi-sensory setups inside someone's home. And of course, we can't do that in everyone's home as we would like, as we're looking forward to Alzheimer's trials now. And so we are actually reducing it into smaller units. We're calling them a type of gamma instrument, a cross between medical instrument and musical instrument, that are portable, lightweight, and also people can have a very active participation as they're creating music and they're experiencing light, and then other senses as well, such as haptic vibration feedback in the 40 hertz spectrum. And so we're really excited to see what are some of these other sensory combinations that will make a big difference. We're thinking a lot about increasing efficacy as well as enjoyment. This was so wonderful to be able to hear gamma in this way, because often, as Todd mentioned, when we're working with the pure stimuli, yeah, exactly, yeah. And so, especially if we're working with elderly individuals, we're wanting it to be an experience that will increase patient compliance and also reduce any kind of tachyphylaxis or people just getting used to it. And so there's a lot we still have to understand. I think we're still at the very tip of the iceberg, but a lot that we're understanding still, yeah?
Yeah, maybe we could actually, it might be interesting to hear the gamma on its own. So maybe if you push up the volume, and we'll do trigger 1, and this is at the very beginning of the piece. Let's just listen for a minute without, wait, stop, not yet. Well, we hear it first without the instruments, and you'll hear a lot of the music that I've done over the years is some combination of acoustic sound and electric sound, and in the electric sound I use, it's always a hybrid. I'm not a purist. I try to make things that are rich and complex and draw your ear somewhere. So even just in this little gamma sound, you'll hear a low E, and you'll hear this buzz, but you'll also hear sometimes it's kind of mushy. It's not an absolutely pure E. It kind of blurs and goes back, and there's some string sounds that are transposed and some synthetic sounds. And so let's just hear a little of the beginning of the piece with no instruments, and then we'll add you guys. Yeah, so even there I was trying to make sure that if you recognize the gamma, the kind of buzz, even when something else comes to kind of envelop it, it's still always there. Do you want to try, you look like you want to say something, no?
Well, I mean, what I want to say is how perfect this is for 50 for the Future, because the idea that string quartet music can now include scientific exploration and inquiry, to me is a really great, well, it's an amazing opportunity that we have as musicians. And it seems like what you guys do here at the Media Lab and throughout MIT is so kind of on the forefront of things. And I just love the fact that this piece is going to make me smarter and brighter and more alert, and I want to get a copy.
Of course, we don't have the results yet. It could do the opposite. You know, we don't.
Well,
you gotta, you know.
That's true. You know, you never know. But I do want to get like an infinite CD or whatever, so that I can play it at night when I'm trying to sleep.
And I just want the opposite side of that is that I think what makes you guys so special as a quartet is you've spent your careers offering the possibility to composers to explore something on the edge for them. There are a lot of people, you know, who come to us as composers and say, you know, we want a piece, but it has to be perfect and the result of something finished. And, you know, I think for these 50 for the Future, you've gone to composers of all ages and all backgrounds to say, you know, give us something that will be fresh in the future, and by definition, that's maybe something kind of not quite finished. So we thank you for that.
I mean, I can also picture older groups, older amateur groups, you know, people who are in their 80s, who are 90s, who are playing their instruments. They're going to want to play this for sure. Just to get
do you think they can do that?
Just to get the
right?
benefits and to play the music. Yeah.
Another aspect of this piece is that Tod wrote this, the music. There's actually rhythm that it's actually through composed in that we play exactly what's on the page, but then he also wrote sections that are improvised. So that is a great aspect. That's a really great aspect for younger groups to develop that. And having a track to play against other players, and it's almost like playing jazz, because you have to fit your part in what's interesting, but then it goes in and out of that. And I think that's a really great aspect of the piece, because that will train young musicians to open their ears in a different way.
So maybe we could just play the whole movement one, so mixed as it usually is, so you can hear the gamma, and then the way the quartet reinforces the gamma, brings out what's already there, adds some extra things.
So, do you mean without the backing?
I mean with the backing.
Yeah, okay.
With the backing? Yeah, I thought maybe I'd ask Ben Bloomberg to come up for a minute to talk about how all these sounds mix, what's easy and hard about that. So how many people in this room don't know Ben? Oh my God, okay. So Ben is a PhD student at the Media Lab, supposedly finishing his PhD, although we're trying to make sure he never does, because Ben's been at the lab for a long time, and is one of the best experts I know in audio technology, setting up live performances with complex technology. So this setup is, relatively simple in a lot of ways, but nothing's simple. So I thought you might talk a little bit about just how you picked a sound system for this and what it's like to blend all these things. And
Cool. Yeah. So this room, as you might see, is not it's not sort of a traditional classical music hall. It's actually a pretty dead room, and so what we've done here, we have a system in Quad that we're working with, and all of the content for the piece is exported in multi-channel, so we can actually spread everything out. And then we can actually design sort of our own sort of signature reverberation for the room based on some convolution that happens in surround sound. And actually, they just installed a new sound system in this room too. So we're actually using all the speakers on the ceiling for reverbs as well. And so with this piece in particular, there's so many different layers that are happening. It's a matter of finding both spectral and spatial sort of resolution for everything to be able to hear everything and have everything sort of coexist, both the acoustic sound of the quartet and all of the different layers of electronics.
so we started, you heard the electronics before, but you didn't hear the music of this until, I think, Saturday?
Yeah.
And we rehearsed downstairs yesterday up here. So were there any kind of surprises in how things mixed? Or, especially, like bad surprises, just things that you didn't expect? Not to say nice things.
Yeah, no. Well, what's very interesting about the gamma signal specifically, one interesting challenge we had actually, the 40 hertz bang on doesn't actually line up with equal tempered music notes. So the lowest E on the piano is actually 41.2 hertz. And so we had to play some games. You can't just do a simple transposition because you end up with all kinds of artifacts. So we actually had to speed the pulse up slightly. But all standard sound equipment is designed to run at certain sampling frequencies. So there were some challenges there. The signal itself is actually really interesting because it's so continuous. You really hear it when you're, usually we're kind of weaving things together by changing the volume continuously. That, I think, is much more obvious with this gamma signal. So it's a challenge to mix it live without it feeling like it's sort of bouncing all over the place. So you can hear even the fade at the beginning because of the nature of the waveform. It almost sounds a little bit stepped. So those are things that we're trying to battle with, I guess.
Thanks. I also want to acknowledge Nikhil Singh, who's a master's student in our group, and he worked on a lot of recordings that we made a year ago of all kinds of sounds from the Kronos Quartet that he cut up and put prepared so that we could mix them and use them in the piece. And Brian Moore, who's the sound designer, I think the Kronos Quartet's probably the only quartet I know that recognized a long time ago that much string quartet music these days should be amplified. Do you play things still that are completely unamped? No. Yeah. So they travel, like a rock band, they travel with a sound engineer, Brian, and they travel with, they have their own little mixers at each, which if you come up and look at them after, they've been on tour a lot. So they're devices that they know very well. They know exactly how to play them. And so it's a new kind. When did you, probably when you started out at the very beginning, you played acoustic unamplified string quartet, no?
Yeah, I started Kronos in 1973.
That's right. There was no amplification then. No.
Well, actually...
Just kidding.
Just kidding. The initial idea was I had just heard Black Angels by George Crumb on the radio.
Yeah, tell people what that is. What amazing.
Black Angels, well, first of all, it's one of the most amazing string quartet pieces. In fact, it's just one of the most amazing pieces of music there is, I think. And sort of by accident, I heard it on the radio in August of 1973 in Seattle. And I'd been looking for music that felt right to play as a young musician in the wake of the American War in Vietnam, and trying to find something that felt right to me. And all of a sudden, on the radio that night, I found it. It was like became the song I had to play. And the next day, I found out who published Black Angels, and a week or so later, there was a score that I got. And looking at that score, it became very clear that in order to play it, I was going to have to get a group together that would rehearse and take this really seriously, and that's what happened. And Black Angels is for electric string quartet, and so the very first electric piece we ever played was Black Angels in the spring of 1974. But when Kronos really went full-time electric would have been around the time of Steve Reich's Different Trains, and when he wrote that for us in 1988. And it was really clear through some major mishaps with various sound engineers and at concert halls around the world that we needed to have somebody that knew the music we were playing and rehearsed with us and was dedicated to making this concert music work live. And Different Trains is for 3 pre-recorded quartets, live quartet, various samples, and the sounds of, I think, 4 or 5 survivors of the Holocaust in Europe and their voices. And so it needed to be as good as we could get it. And so that piece really propelled us to want to and need to have our own sound engineer.
And those are definitely electronic sounding pieces. But we also play pieces that shouldn't be electrified sounding. And so we have the benefit of having a great sound engineer that can imitate great concert halls. So if you're in a not such a good hall, you can have that ability with the reverb and whatever, but have a more natural sound. And so a lot of people come to our concerts realizing they think it's not enhanced electronically, because we want to preserve that aspect of it as well. So it's really great nowadays that there's so many types of music using different sounds, and we've been able to investigate and research and do all kinds of experiments with what can work.
And so the other night, when several weeks ago, when the whole world saw the cathedral at Notre Dame burning, it was, I mean, I remember on several of our recordings, we have used the Notre Dame reverb, and we've wanted it in concerts. We wanted to take that sound around the world, and it was a very, I've spent a lot of time in there just listening, because the sound in that place is so miraculous.
There's an amazing article in this week's New Yorker by somebody who went and talked to all the 3 organists at Notre Dame. And the good news is that they thought that the organ, which is one of the most famous in the world, had been destroyed. So it wasn't destroyed. The organ is intact, but everybody knows that the acoustic of that building will never be it won't necessarily be worse, but it'll never be the same. because so much wood is gone, and once whatever the roof is that they put in. So, yeah, so the acoustic signature of something, especially that's been that way for 1,000 years, is irreplaceable, very special, and yeah.
So, Brian, can you make this room sound like Notre Dame for us, please?
Like Notre Dame 1,000 years ago. Do that. So maybe why don't we play the piece again? And then my suggestion would be, since we have a live stream audience today, but we're not really set up to do questions and Q&A with a live stream audience, maybe we'll play the piece, and then afterwards we're happy to stay here and talk about any aspect of this and answer questions and just hang out for a little while. Does that sound good? Okay.
No, I think we should. Yeah.
Well, I don't think we have to rehearse it, but I do think that section 4, I think it was too fast.
I regretted that tempo the instant I started it.
As soon as you started, I was like, oh my God.
I was hoping you wouldn't notice, Todd.
The other guys, yeah, it's very hard to play that fast. So
Yeah, we'll settle down.
I'd be curious how long. Let me show you.
Okay, so maybe we'll say goodbye to our live stream audience. You want to all wave goodbye? Bye.